So family therapy started as a reaction to what was missing when people were just seen individually in counseling. In fact, there was a time when people were only seen individually, and when kids would go to counseling and they would do better, and then one of their siblings would end up having difficulties. And so they realized that we all affect each other in families. And if one person changes, it can affect the whole system. And why not bring everybody together and try to support the whole system, and also to help the system support the person who's having difficulty? So the idea was it was also a reaction to psychoanalysis, which sometimes focuses on what's wrong with people. And family therapy, at its best core, focuses on the idea that we all have strengths and resources and resilience, and we all have challenges, and that the most important thing about overcoming challenges is flexibility, that when changes happen, if we're flexible, we can overcome a challenge. And when changes happen, or trauma happens, or life happens, or illness comes upon people, or people are affected in horrible ways by white supremacy and racism and homophobia and all that kind of stuff, that we look at individual resources, the resources in our relationships with each other, in our families, and also the relationship between the individuals and the family and the larger culture, to try to look at what are the patterns that end up happening that can contribute to problems, as opposed to looking at what's wrong with this person because they're having a problem. So we try to figure out what patterns are the problems getting people caught up in. And at its best, we're like an anthropologist trying to understand the culture of each family. Family therapists are facilitating conversations where they strive to understand each individual family's particular culture, their cultural context. And so that our job is not to tell people how to change and fix their lives, but to help empower them to bring the resources that they have to those situations. And one last thing I'll say is that if you have a child that you're concerned about and you send them, or a teenager, and you send them to an individual therapist, oftentimes they may not even talk about the things that you're concerned about. So it also empowers parents to have an effect on the help that their kids are getting by being a part of it, and also getting support. Because if kids are struggling, you know, they say you're only as happy as your least happy kid, right? So how can we support families who are struggling?
And, you know, going to what Liz said in terms of the relationships, the Black community, there's a sense of collectivism compared to individualism that is so much part of white culture, I think. And, you know, talking about the relationships, it's important for providers, for anyone to understand that when you have someone coming to you, it's not just that one person that's sitting in your office. There's also the family. There's also even the extended family. I work. My work is my practice. A lot of immigrant communities, and for them, often it's not just the family who's here in the States. There's the extended family, and sometimes there's family in their home country, and the family in the home country is quite often just an integral part of the family. So helping folks understand the patterns and the systems and how it can influence the one person who's sitting in your office, that's also part of my work. And it goes along with what Liz said in terms of relationships, understand relationships. And so, you know, there's there's the one family in your room, but then also one for you to understand who else is not in the room, but that's also part of the family.
Oh. And so if we are, you know, talking to the Black community and saying, you know, this is something that might be helpful, what would you say would be some of the reasons why folks in the Black community should consider, you know, family therapy when they're looking for therapy modalities like individual and so on? What should lead them to maybe consider family therapy?
So what I explain to them is it helps them understand I'm going to use the term pattern that, when I took Lizzie's course, track the patterns, track. So help them understand the patterns, the forces that are at play, that are influencing either the one person coming to me or the child who's the identified patient in the family. So helps them understand that, again, to remove the stigma and helping them, explaining to them that it's not about the negative aspects, what they're doing wrong, but for them to understand how to identify the positives in the relationships and to strengthen those and bring them forth so they can address the negative aspects. Yeah. So in the sense, for them to understand, how do I phrase it? For them to understand the child better, or themselves better, and how the larger culture influence who they are. And when I mean the larger culture, I also talk about white supremacy and the structural racism, for them to understand their reactions in that context.
Oh, so then it kind of helps to have a kind of a broader view and not just this narrow view on like one person who's like the identified patient and you need to go and kind of have this addressed, but rather this larger culture, this larger context of what causes people to have stress and causes them to have any disruptions in mental health, kind of identifying those larger systems. And yes. I like the fact that it's strength-based, at least as Liz has said, at its best, family therapy should be strength-based, and that it promotes the resilience of families. Because I think maybe one of the fears is that, folks are going to go in and they're going to see a therapist that's going to basically tell them that their family is everything wrong. Your family is not strong. These are all the weaknesses about your family. But at best, family therapy should be, here's what your family's doing well. Let's build upon those strengths and let's see if we can leverage those strengths to kind of, work on the areas that need to be worked on.
Oh, go
ahead.
Can I say something about barriers to the Black community accessing family therapy?
Sure, go ahead.
I think, I used to do home-based work in Roxbury and Dorchester, and I was like a child at the time practically. But I was very earnest and determined, and I did really believe that people know how to live their best lives even back then. But I worked in a context where I very quickly understood that there were a lot of systemic forces that might make families reluctant. And where does the stigma come from? I worked in a program where often DCF made the referral to family therapy, and that's complicated because if somebody tells you you need to go to family therapy, otherwise, we might remove your kid, or you need to go to family therapy to get your kid back. I think that's a hard way to start. Mm-hmm. And, yes. And also we know that Black families are more highly represented in the DCF caseload because of unconscious bias and all sorts of things. And so I think if people are consumers of family from their own initiative, they can avoid that kind of thing. And if people end up having to be consumers of family therapy because their kids are connected to DCF, because kids are in programs, I think it's really important that people use their voice to let providers know what their concerns are and what their needs are, and try to create a distinction between, okay, maybe I have to do this to get what I want from a system, but really how can I make the best use of this service if it is being imposed upon me? And if it's not being imposed, how can I think about these kinds of things as a resource, as opposed to something that's going to be further traumatic and marginalizing?
I like that reframe. The idea of kind of saying, even though this is a situation that we're in, where the referral is under these circumstances, how can we still use it? How can we still kind of raise our voice and kind of be heard and still make the most out of the services? So what I wanted to talk about a little bit too was the idea of making space in the therapy room, so to speak, kind of like just emotional, psychological space for issues of racial identity. So if you have a family, maybe they're a Black family, maybe they're mixed, you know, they're people of varying races in one family, and you have a therapist that may be Black, maybe white. What are some of the, I mean, is it possible for people of therapists from all backgrounds to really work successfully with families from all backgrounds? And I know, Liz, you've kind of taught on some of these things, and Marie, I know you're practicing some of these things. So I wanted you to comment on how you make space in that room for issues of racial identity, talking about race and families, and for people bringing their whole selves and their whole cultures. Maybe I'll start with Marie. How do you do that in your work? And then Liz, how do you do it and how do you teach it?
So how I do it, in terms of the way I set up my sessions, the initial session is with the kind of the whole family, and I do that a lot with couples. So with whoever's present, whoever is willing to engage in counseling, and depending on the number of folks, I try to have some individual time with each person in terms of addressing issues, whether it's racial identity, even sometimes gender identity. I'll touch base on that in the individual sessions, just to get a sense of, is this person really motivated to work on family? Is this person, what are the issues that they're seeing and what are the strengths of the family? Because sometimes initially some members of the family may be quiet or silent, and I need to have an alliance with them so I know, okay, what is it that from their perspective? So that, and then from there, then that's how I do it. And then once I have everybody back as a family, then I try to raise that in terms of the whole family session. What are the issues that they see? What is it that they want to bring up? But in my individual sessions, that's when I also coach them in terms of what is it that you want the rest of the family to know. So that's how I address some of that. And can anyone successfully work with any type of family? I'm not sure. What I know is, Liz talked earlier about course correcting. When I do family therapy, I always, every time I have a session, the following session, I say, so how was that session for you? Was it productive? What did you feel like you got what you needed, so you can do some of the work in between sessions? And part of what I said, so we're meeting once a week or we're meeting once every other week. It's gonna be important to continue the conversation, at home. So were you able to do that, and what is it that you need? So I continually evaluate my practice in terms of seeking feedback from them.
In terms of working across difference, and can everybody work with anybody? I think we can't work with people if we don't have the desire, the intention, and the willingness to learn, or if we're too uncomfortable with something. So that stands with issues about working across difference, across racial differences, across gender differences, as well as particular issues. Like some people say, I can't work with men who've been domestically violent. Well, if you can't, you can't, and you shouldn't, right? So I think what's really important when you're working across difference is to be aware of the difference and to create a space where people are able to talk about it, where people are able to educate you about who they are and what's important to them, what's important to know about their culture and how that affects how they want their family to be, and to be humble. And that's true. I think our best therapy is when we're humble and we don't know, and we know what we don't know. And that, to me, that's one of the gifts of being a therapist, is that we get to learn about so many different people and cultures and ways of living. So we have to just put our ego on the back burner and be open to feedback.
So you approach from a place of cultural humility, of just,
Yeah.
You don't have all the answers. You're learning and appreciating and leaving room for people's differences, but also the awareness as a therapist of what you're comfortable with, your own comfort level.
Mm-hmm.
So if there are, as any therapist out there, if there's any particular kind of client that they personally don't feel ready to kind of work with, that they should be aware of that and kind of act wisely, act accordingly.
Mm-hmm.
What would you like Black couples to know about couples counseling and about the role that it can have, how helpful it can be?
I'll start my answer by talking about a case I had. This was a young couple. They were engaged and about to get married, and they decided to come to counseling so it was essentially, I feel like I was doing premarital counseling. So for them, they just wanted to know, they had some tension in the past, and to really go through, talk through the tensions that they had in terms of having a real successful marriage. So that's what I would say. It doesn't have, I would encourage people, it doesn't have to be when there's problems. It can be when things are going well, so you can learn what's going well, how you can do more of that, how we can strengthen those bonds with your partner, and then identify ways to, in terms of communication strategies, how can you talk about the stuff that's not going so well. Okay. So essentially, if we're going strength-based, it's really not wait when there's really big issues going on. Because if you start when things sound so bad, then you learn the foundation. You learn. Sometimes I call it kind of money in the bank. So you learn the little ways that you can address the little things, the little issues, so you can address the bigger issues later on.
Oh. So it's not, couples counseling is not just for couples that are in a crisis.
That's how I'd say, and it's really about learning the patterns, in terms of your communication, and identifying strategies to address it. Yes.
Research shows, I don't know how they did this research, that couples wait 7 years too late before they come to couple therapy, where things have really been stewing and brewing for a long time. And so and couple therapy is really a very, very hard thing to do, because the therapist is stuck in the middle of two people who each want you to usually take their side. And it's very vulnerable as a couple to bring your intimate relationship to an outside person, but it can also be a beautiful healing thing, because our intimate relationships are, I think, what we live for in a way.
Just wanted to ask you to talk about what you enjoy about doing family therapy, what you enjoy about your work, as kind of the final question. So Marie, tell us a little bit about what you enjoy about your work, and yeah.
So for me, it goes back to being a Black woman, being an immigrant woman, being Haitian, and working with immigrant population, even working with some Haitian families who are slowly coming into, accepting and understanding that therapy can help. So seeing that there's the acceptance, and seeing that there's the changes that can be made. And when I do my continual, evaluation, asking them, so what's been working, not just that, yeah, it's been helpful, but trying to find out, so what exactly was helpful, and to find out it was maybe something I said, something I did. So to me, that makes it worthwhile. So doing this work, as much as there's all of the challenges, I talked about this interracial couple I had worked with, but especially families, helping them understand that, in terms of being more accepting. And so that absolutely brings me joy.
One of the things I actually love about doing this work is that sometimes people come and they end, and then they come back when there might be another challenge in their life. And I love to be able to have those kind of ongoing relationships where I see people grow and change and then come back, and when there's another challenge. I mean, I think I just love the relationships with people. And growing up in my family with my dad, who had bipolar disorder, I was really kind of in a family therapy role when I was about 5. And so I think I was then there was a lot of bad things that happened when my dad was manic, he was violent. And I think it helped me to understand it's not us and them. It's not those bad families who have problems. We all have problems on a continuum. We can all act badly on a continuum. I knew that I could love somebody who at times his behavior was terrible. And so I love to be able to help people take responsibility for the ways that they're being destructive to themselves and other people and improve their relationships.